Instagram. Today I want to talk about sociability in dogs and whether or not it's a problem. In the dog sports world, we generally look for dogs that are more social because it's easier. We're going to take them to public spaces and they're going to be in circumstances where a dog that is social, or at least not antisocial, is probably going to have an easier time of the environment. How about the pet dog world? Well, sociability is desirable in the sense that in many places people see dogs as community property. So what I mean is you're walking down the street and some kids see your dog and mom was like, oh, can we see the doggy? Can we see the doggy, kind of a thing? And then the kids want to run over and want to pet the dog. And a lot of owners really struggle to say no. Okay, so that's not really a dog problem. That's a people problem. In much of the world, people don't do that. They don't run up to other people's dogs. They no more try to pet your dog than they try to pet your spouse. They don't do that. So they might say, oh, nice dog. But the recognition is that the dog belongs to these other people. And if you want a dog, get your own dog. But that's not an American philosophy. In the United States, definitely there's a sense of community property around dogs. And it's very, very common if a person has a dog that everybody wants to run up and see it. Now, what's interesting is that if people have a cat or a bird, you don't see that. So people might say, oh, you have a cat, but they might say, can I pet the cat? And if you say, it doesn't really like strangers, most people don't pursue that. They don't persist. They're like, oh, okay. And they move on. There seems to be more of an acceptance that cats come with their own personalities and less of a sense that we're going to make a cat be what we want. Most of us just sort of accept the cat we get without making a huge effort to try to change the cat's behavior. We just live with cats. We don't just live with dogs. We have ideas about what dogs are supposed to be, and we will actively try to cause that. So here's why I'm thinking about this. I've seen some stuff around dogs that aren't too social, don't really like people. And the implication is that the dog has to be changed, right? So these dogs that don't really want to interact with strangers are a problem. And the trainer is going to solve that problem, is going to somehow make this dog tolerant of or liking maybe even interactions with random strangers. That's a big ask. And the reason it's a big ask is you're talking about fundamentally changing the personality of a being. Now, it's a little different than a dog who had a terrible experience at some point. Maybe he's very genetically social, something bizarre happened. And after that, the dog got weird. And so in that case, you probably have the most luck at changing the dog into a more social being, right? Because the dog was a social being, lost it as a result of an event, and then you're working to getting it back just by rebuilding the dog's trust in people. But what about a dog that's just not comfortable with people? What about a breed of dog that's not normally super social? Like a lot of the herding dogs are notoriously one-person dogs or family dogs. And it's written into their standards, that they're not the dog for the neighborhood, right? Like not every dog is supposed to be a Labrador. And in the same way that we don't say, well, we can make this Labrador shy and into a one-person dog, we don't normally take most of the herding breeds and say, well, I'm going to make this cattle dog love everyone. When the cattle dog is like, don't really want to love everybody. I have a young border collie here. He is not people social. So he's not people aggressive. He's people avoidant. And I think it's more about lack of exposure, lack of familiarity, whatever. But it's not been a problem. He's been here almost 5 months. And not once has it been an issue that he prefers not to be handled by strangers. Not one time. Sometimes I have to tell people, leave him alone. Like if I see somebody approaching him or staring at him, I say, best to just leave him alone. He doesn't want to interact with you. Once, several years ago, I said that to somebody around my Belgian who's not only not social, but would not handle that well. And the person proceeded to come forward anyway. And I said, no, I'm serious. And I started backing up and I said, no, you can't approach. Now that was a little awkward because the guy was older, probably 80, and just like completely disregarded me. But I have to stand up because that's my job, right? If you're the owner of a dog and your dog has a dislike for people, then step up. That's a you problem, not a dog problem. So instead of saying, well, I'm going to teach my dog to be social, how about you teach yourself how to navigate the world and help your dog be more comfortable? Now, with my border collie, a very interesting thing has happened, and it really shouldn't surprise you. He is actually starting to interact with people. So in the beginning, if you came near, he would back up, go behind me, whatever. And I would just say, just leave him alone. And they did. Everybody did. And in my house, if I had reason to think people were coming in, I would put him away. I would crate him because then he didn't have to deal with it. There was no reason for him to have that experience. At this point, if people came to my house, I'd probably leave him out and just tell people, leave him alone. Just ignore him. And he'd go about to his own thing. But I've seen something in the last few weeks, which is interesting. Most people just know by now, leave my dog alone. And I've noticed him starting to show interest in people. So he'll start to sort of approach, and the person will look at me, and I'll say, hey, puppy. And if he comes over, he comes over. And if he doesn't, that's fine. He's actually starting to go to people. And then they can scratch his head a little bit, and he's fine, right? Sometimes he'll even just stay there, and they can pet his head. And when he's done, he leaves, and he comes back to me. So my sense is that in a year or so, he will sort of navigate the scale between neutral about people. In other words, people being around him isn't going to cause him to look twice. It's not going to be a concern for him. To social, if somebody calls to him or if he feels like going up and visiting with a person. And the reason he is getting to that place is he's realizing that people leave him alone. The easiest way to get a dog to become more neutral, whether it's an aggressive dog or a fearful dog, is to leave the dog alone. Now, if you push into the dog's space and the dog has to react in order to get you to back off, like an aggressive dog has to growl or lunge or whatever, then you're training the dog to growl and lunge to get the reaction you want. So you'd be wise to not put the dog in a situation where it feels like it needs to do that. And if you're the owner, you'd be extra wise to figure out at what distance your dog gets uncomfortable and just don't let people come within that bubble or move your dog out of the bubble. It doesn't matter how you dress it. But what you don't want is for your dog to take matters into their own hands. And then you get upset about it, right? So your fearful dog is now cowering behind you. You could stop the person before you're in that circumstance. Once you know your dog has that issue, just ask people, you know what, he's getting uncomfortable. And if your dog does go behind you, ignore it. Just let him do it. You know, he's just getting out of the way. It's not a big deal. And if your dog is very forward, you should be learning those early signs that tells you your dog is now getting into a place where things are uncomfortable for them. If you do that, you're very likely to get a point where your dog is quite tolerant of the presence of people. So my Belgian, when he was about 7 or 8 months old, became quite antisocial to the point where if I took him in public, he was targeting people at an unacceptable distance, let's say 50 to 100 feet. And I'm like, well, that's not going to work. So we're just not going to go to those places, parks. I never took him to coffee shops, but if I had, we're not going to go to those places because that's not going to work. I can't have him targeting people at that distance. It's not reasonable to stay away from people at those distances. And frankly, it's not necessary to take him to places where he's going to be in that circumstance. Why do I have to go to the park? I don't. So I didn't for a long time. And we went to dog places where people are, dog savvy. So they're not paying any attention to him. I can work with him. I can manage him. At this point, I can take him for a walk in the neighborhood. I can take him for a walk in crowded places. I can take him for a walk at a park. It doesn't matter. People are relatively unimportant to him. He's aware of them. He ignores them. But what if a person says, can I come up and pet your dog? No, you can't. Now I'm going to say it as nicely as I can. And I'll probably say something along the lines of, he's really a one-person dog. He does not like to interact with strangers. So it'd be better if you leave this one alone. If I have another dog with me who's social, I might say you can pet that one. I don't actually have one of those right now, but that's a very reasonable solution. But this isn't a problem. I don't know why it would be a problem. In my house, if I think things are going to get intense, there are going to be too many people or whatever, I put him away. There's no safety risk if you put the dog away. There is a safety risk if you try to change your dog, who's aggressive or fearful, into a dog who has no choice but to interaction with people. And the reason is, if the dog is in over their head and you don't notice, or the dog is just trigger stacking, or the dog isn't feeling well that day, you're placing the dog at risk. So what kind of risk? Well, if the dog is forward, antisocial, aggressive, you risk the dog snapping or biting, and you don't want that, especially because it's so unnecessary. Why was the dog in that situation in the first place? If your dog is fearful, you risk the dog hiding, peeing, having a bad reaction to a person that never had to happen. Why did somebody need to pet your dog? Why did they need to approach your dog? They didn't. Dogs that go towards people to make trouble, you can remove them from the circumstance. It's not that you can't train the dogs to improve. You can. But when you force the dog and you say, well, just got to make sure you understand that, biting is not a choice if it's a fearful biter or if it's a forward aggressive biter. When you do that, you better be prepared to be in a circumstance forever where you can back that up. Because I think most dog trainers know of circumstances where a dog got trained that way and it worked for some period of time, weeks, months, and then on the wrong day, the wrong time, it didn't work. Or in one case, I remember getting a note from somebody who said, well, the trainer says just keep turning the e-collar up. And I said, you got to find a different trainer. That's not a reasonable answer, right? To a dog that's biting people, just keep turning the collar up. That's not addressing the issue. You can choose to work through it through training. In the meantime, though, manage your dog. Keep your dog out of circumstances where this is going to be a problem. I'm amazed at how often management turns into training. Like what I just described with my young dog. Time went by and he's just getting more social. Give him more time. I think the sociability will come because people don't bother him. They don't represent risk. And so on his own time, he's willing to kind of walk over and see who they are. And they can interact or not. And he can interact or not. And he can walk away. Giving your dog some choice in the matter is not a big deal. I mean, the vast majority of dogs are not looking to bite people. There are some. They're pretty darn rare. Most dogs are biting because they're put in circumstances that they want to get out of. But what if you have a dog that you're eating a sandwich and he's learned that jumping on you and growling at you causes you to drop the sandwich? Well, you do have a problem. You have a problem. That can be trained out, and the dog can learn that it's actually not going to work for you to act like that. But that percentage of dogs is on the small side. Although while I'm thinking about it, we do have a webinar tomorrow at today's Tuesday, Thursday night at FDSA on that specifically. What about when the aggression is not fear-based? And that's really worth your while if you're sort of interested in that topic, because it exists. It's not the more common type of aggression. It's usually fear-oriented aggression, but some dogs definitely are just pretty full of themselves and pretty willing to go forward to get what they want. So check that out if it's an interest. In the meantime, if you're just a random dog owner, I think there's a lot to be said for respecting the fact that your dog comes with a temperament. And the vast majority of the time, your dog's temperament does not need to change. You can change, and you can change the environments that you put your dogs in so that they're not constantly put at risk. When my Belgian must be handled by strangers, I can think of two circumstances. One is when he goes to the vet, he's muzzled. It's very simple. I put a muzzle on him. This is not a big deal. He knows he's muzzled. When he's muzzled, he knows he can't bite. Simple. He doesn't try. He's just like, okay, this sucks. You'll know he's angry because he's going to tell you. He's going to growl. He's not going to lunge. He's not going to do anything. But the whole time he's going to breathe out going like that. And I just tell him, that's all right, buddy. You're fine. You're fine. As soon as the person's hands are off of him, he's fine. Lays down on the ground, can take the muzzle off. Totally fine. If they're going to touch him again, put the muzzle on. What's the big deal? Not a big deal. The vets don't mind. They know he's under control. They're relaxed. We get the job done. But I had to get a CGC on him, and a CGC does not allow a muzzle for touch. So I trained it. I taught him, stand and look at me, you'll get a toy. Stand and look at me and a person take a step towards you, you'll get a toy. Stand and look at me and a person's going to touch you, you're going to get a toy. And I did this with dog savvy people first, and eventually we got to the point where strangers could do this. Now, I'd like to point out that this is very different than sending him up to somebody to be social. He never is going to get there, and it's not necessary. It's unimportant. But what he did learn is that he could do basically a stand stay. And he didn't look at the person, and the person touched him the way you have to touch him for a CGC and then moved away, and that was the end of it. And in the test, there's no toy, but it doesn't matter because he understood the pattern. So what I was teaching the dog was, in this context, this is what we're going to do, and this is how it's going to work for you. I said toy, you might use food, but my dog is a toy dog. So that made sense. In the veterinary context, he understands when you're wearing a muzzle, you're not going to bite anybody, even if you're angry. It just takes the issue off the table. Now, what would happen if I took him to the vet and he wasn't muzzled for whatever reason? He would probably snap, would be my guess. He would turn and snap. I don't think he wants to bite anyone. He just wants to touch He wants strangers not to touch him in that context. So I'm simply advocating for work with the temperament of the dog you have. If you can bring out the most comfortable and secure side of the dog, you might discover that many behavior problems just go away. And the reason they go away is that the behavior problems are a reflection of the dog's discomfort. So the reason the dog is yelling is because he's not comfortable in the circumstance and he wants it to change. If he learns that those circumstances, which are relatively common, cause him no harm, then there's nothing to yell about. There's nothing to be upset about. And if it's the actual physical touch, I think if you're a reasonably responsible dog owner who wants to do right by your dog, and if you're listening to this live, you are probably in that category. Stop trying to find out what will happen this time. I wonder what will happen if. I wonder if he'll like this. No. What difference does it make? Where are you going with this? Put him away. Put your dog away. Let your dog be comfortable. It's your dog. You got a dog for yourself. If you didn't, you may well have gotten the wrong dog. Like if you really wanted a dog park dog, you probably got the wrong breed. If your dog is, get yourself a lab or a golden or whatever. But if your dog is just not that sociable, it probably doesn't matter as much as you think it does, especially if the dog would prefer avoidance. As a matter of fact, there's a lot to be said for teaching a dog avoidance. So if somebody comes in the house, my dog does this. If a car pulls up in front of the place I stay at the ranch, I just say, go to your house. And he just goes in his crate, shut the door, let the people in. It's the simplest solution in the world. There's no conversation at the front door about interacting with the dog, not interacting with the dog. There's no worry, but is he going to jump on this person? There's nothing. He's in his crate. Person comes in. He barks for 10 seconds. I say, thank you, that's enough. He stops barking. The people settle in. If they're dog people and they want him out, then I'll say, I'll let him out, but just ignore him. I let him out. They're sitting down. He runs over to see them. They ignore him. He realizes that's not going to get him anywhere. He goes and does his own thing, lays down. It's not a big deal. And the border collie, at this point, I leave him loose when people come in. So people come in, he goes, woo, 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 runs back and forth 20, 30 feet away. I say, ignore him. They come in, they sit down or whatever. The Belgian's in the crate. He stops barking. The border collie stops barking because the Belgian's not barking and nothing's happening. He might come over and sniff the people. I say, ignore him. And then he lays down. Not a big deal. And then the little terrier, the little old man, he actually does kind of like being scratched. He doesn't want to be picked up. So rather than teaching him to tolerate being picked up, I taught people not to pick him up. So when he goes over, I say, you can pet him, but don't pick him up. He's small. People like to pick up small dogs. I say, he doesn't like to be picked up. Just pet him. How hard is that? He's 12 and a half years of age, and not one day in my entire life has it been a hardship to tell people, don't pick him up. He doesn't like it. And if I thought they were going to start picking him up, I'd be like, hey, no, don't pick him up. He doesn't like it. You can do that. If you need to and you're really uncomfortable telling people what to do, being directive, then practice your words before the event comes up, or put the dog away if you're not sure you're going to be able to follow through, or if you're going to run into the old man who just can't take no for an answer. But that's not that common. And I don't let my dogs interact with children at all. Children are too erratic. So I think children should only interact with bomb-proof dogs that want to be there. Like there's some dogs that just genuinely love children. Great. Those are the ones the kids can play with. It's always the old guys. Yeah, I have relatively little trouble, but this kind of took me by surprise because he was just going right over the top of my words. And then when I straightened him out, he was like, oh, and I'm like, whatever, but you're not touching my dog. I didn't say that, but I was definitely a little like, wow, that was bold. All right, let's see if you have anything to say. I'm lucky my Mal is social. Once a neighbor pets him and says, he's really friendly for a husky. I was like, what the fuck? I've heard skinny German Shepherd before, but husky, I've heard the gamut. You are lucky, and I actually was hoping my Belgian would be social. Sociability is easier. He's not social. He was social up until 4 months of age, and then he said, yeah, no, I'm done with that. You're not going to touch me anymore. And he was never the move away, distressed peeing. He would just stand there and look at you and growl. It's like, don't touch me. At 4 months. And I was like, he's just a very confident dog that doesn't want his space invaded. I don't want strangers touching me. I'm not a hugger. Like, if you know me, it's okay. But I don't like being hugged. And I don't need to change that. Sometimes I have to tolerate it. But that's just like a cultural thing. Some people are huggers. Some people ask, and I go, I'm not really a hugger, but I like you a lot, so I'll hug you. My dog doesn't like to be touched, so don't touch him. Okay, I don't see any other comments. Quiet night, huh? That's it. I have another topic, but I'm going to do it on another day so we can keep these a little bit shorter. I hope you all have a good evening. Anyway, to summarize, why don't you just respect your dog's temperaments? Most dogs can be managed pretty well. If they're a little extra social, the same is true for highly social dogs. Put them away rather than knocking yourself out to train them not to jump on people. Put them away until they calm down. If your dog's a little shy, it's not a big deal. Put your dog away if you need to. If your dog's a little on the forward aggressive side, put your dog away. If your dog's on the fear aggressive side, put your dog away. You can work on all these issues, but in the meantime, don't force your dog. It's just not important. You're causing problems where there don't need to be any. Anyway, that's it. Y'all have a good day. Take care. Bye-bye.